In the operations room of NATO's premier air combat maneuvering installation, a debrief is about to begin. On one side of the room, pilots from the United States Air Force's fabled F-15 Eagle Squadron, based at Bitburg, Germany, America's finest, flying the most feared air superiority fighter ever built, a jet with a combat record that, at the time of this story, stood at over 100 kills and 0 losses. On the other side, pilots of 801 Naval Air Squadron, Royal Navy, flying a small subsonic vertical takeoff jet that most of the aviation world considered little more than an air show curiosity. A jump jet, a novelty, a machine that serious fighter pilots flew with a polite smile and quiet condescension. The debrief begins. The instructor calls up the film from the combat maneuvering installation, the overhead tracking system that records every aircraft's position, speed, and weapons parameters throughout the engagement, second by second, without ambiguity or dispute. The numbers appear. The F-15 pilots stare at the screen. The Sea Harrier has done it again. Commander Nigel David Sharkey Ward, Royal Navy, walks out of Decimomannu having recorded an exercise score against the F-15 Eagle that military aviation analysts will debate for decades. 23 wins, 1 loss, against the most battle-proven air superiority fighter on the planet. This is his story, and it begins not in a cockpit, but in a hospital bed, with a small boy who wasn't supposed to live long enough to fly anything at all. To understand why what Sharkey Ward achieved was so remarkable, you have to understand what the Sea Harrier was, and what the aviation world thought of it. The Harrier concept had been developed through the 1960s as a ground attack aircraft for the RAF, a jet that could take off vertically, hover, and land without a runway. Revolutionary in concept, deeply unconventional in execution. The engine's thrust nozzles could be rotated to direct the jet exhaust downward for vertical flight, or backward for conventional forward flight. It was the first operational jet aircraft in the world capable of sustained vertical and short takeoff and landing, a capability that opened up entirely new operational possibilities, particularly for the Royal Navy, which operated smaller carriers than the United States Navy, and could not use the steam catapults and arrestor wires of a conventional carrier air wing. The Sea Harrier was the naval version, adapted for carrier operations, fitted with a radar, given air-to-air missiles, equipped to defend a fleet rather than merely attack ground targets. When it entered service in 1978, it was described in the press as a remarkable machine. Aviation journalists wrote admiring pieces about its vertical takeoff capability, its agility, its unique place in the history of jet propulsion. What the aviation world did not take seriously, what the fighter pilots of the USAF and the Luftwaffe and the Armée de l'Air privately dismissed, was the idea that this small, slow, subsonic jump jet could be a credible dogfighter. Against the F-15 Eagle, a jet specifically designed from first principles to kill other aircraft, powered by 2 enormous Pratt & Whitney engines that gave it a thrust-to-weight ratio approaching 1-to-1, equipped with the most powerful fighter radar of its generation, capable of speeds above Mach 2.5, the Sea Harrier looked like a mismatched opponent in every relevant category. It was slower, it had a shorter range. Its radar, the Ferranti Blue Fox, was by any objective measure less powerful than the F-15's APG-63. It carried fewer missiles. It had no afterburner in the conventional sense. On paper, there was no competition. The F-15 was simply better. Ward knew all of this, and Ward was not interested in paper. What Ward was interested in was the one thing that the specifications and the performance charts and the comparative radar range tables could never capture. What happened when 2 aircraft, with 2 pilots, met inside visual range, and the fight became close, fast, and geometrically unforgiving? Because in that environment, inside visual range, in the merge, where energy management and instantaneous turn rate and the pilot's ability to read the geometry of a 3-dimensional engagement decided everything, the Sea Harrier had something the F-15 pilots had not fully reckoned with. It had Ward, and Ward had been studying this problem since the day he first strapped into a Sea Harrier. The first confrontation between the Sea Harrier and America's finest happened not over Sardinia, but at RAF Alconbury in England, where the USAF maintained an F-15 aggressor squadron, an elite unit whose entire purpose was to simulate Soviet fighter tactics and train American pilots in dissimilar air combat. Ward's intensive flying trials unit was invited to fly against the aggressors. The result was something nobody outside his own squadron had expected. The Sea Harriers went in as the underdogs. They came out with 26 kills recorded against 10 losses, against USAF aggressors, professional air combat instructors, flying a jet specifically optimized for dissimilar training, with all the accumulated expertise of America's top-tier fighter community. The word spread quickly. It always does in the fighter world. The boss of the F-15 Eagle Squadron at Bitburg, Germany, one of the most prestigious fighter postings in the United States Air Force, called Ward, not to argue the results, not to dismiss them. He called because he wanted to see it for himself. He wanted to bring 2 of his F-15s to Ward's unit and find out exactly what was happening. Ward and his wingman, Ian Mortimer, flew against the 2 Bitburg Eagles. The result? 7 kills to 1, in favor of the Sea Harrier. 7 to 1. Against frontline F-15 Eagles, flown by experienced USAF pilots in a controlled, dissimilar air combat evaluation. The Bitburg squadron commander went back to Germany with something to think about. Ward went back to developing his tactics with the quiet intensity of a man who had known all along that this was possible, and was now in the process of proving it to a world that still did not quite believe him. The real test came in December 1981 at Decimomannu. The air combat maneuvering installation at Decimomannu on the Italian island of Sardinia was NATO's most sophisticated air combat training facility, a range equipped with transponders and tracking systems that could follow every aircraft in a training engagement and produce, afterward, an irrefutable record of exactly what had happened, who had the shot, who had been shot, who had maneuvered correctly, and who had made a fatal error. There was no arguing with Decimomannu's data. The machines did not have opinions. Ward took 801 Naval Air Squadron south from Britain, flying the Sea Harriers down across France to participate in what he described as tri-national fighter combat training against the best of the US and Italian Air Forces. The Bitburg F-15s were there. The USAF aggressor F-5Es were there. The Italian Air Force was represented. And then the fighting began. Over several days of engagements, tracked and recorded by Decimomannu's systems and adjudicated by air warfare instructors who had no interest in flattering either side, the Sea Harriers flew against the F-15 Eagles. Again and again. Different scenarios, different geometries, different starting conditions. The final tally, as Ward himself recorded it, and as the exercise data confirmed, 23 wins for the Sea Harrier, 1 loss, 23 to 1. Against the F-15 Eagle, America's unbeatable fighter. The jet that had never lost a real air-to-air engagement in its operational history. The question that military aviation analysts spent years attempting to answer after Decimomannu, and that Ward's critics spent years attempting to discount, is simple. How? How does a subsonic jump jet with a less powerful radar, fewer missiles, and slower top speed beat the F-15 Eagle at a ratio of 23 to 1? The answer has several components. Ward was precise and methodical in explaining all of them, in interviews, in his memoir, and in his ongoing advocacy for close-range air combat training. Understanding those components is understanding not just how Ward beat the F-15, but why the result was not the fluke his detractors wanted it to be. The first factor was the nature of the engagement itself. The exercises at Decimomannu were within visual range, close in, where the physics of the merge and the geometry of turning flight matter more than radar range or missile reach. Beyond visual range, the F-15's superior radar and longer-range missiles would have dominated. Ward knew this. The F-15 pilots knew it too. The debate was never about beyond visual range combat. It was about what happened when two aircraft closed to within a few miles of each other, and the fight became a turning, energy-burning, gut-feel contest of aerobatics and tactical awareness. In that environment, the Sea Harrier had a specific and poorly understood advantage. Its thrust-to-weight ratio at low speed and low altitude was exceptional. The Rolls-Royce Pegasus engine that powered the Harrier was designed to produce enormous thrust at all flight regimes, including the very low speeds that other jets found difficult to manage cleanly. At low speed, in a turning fight, the Sea Harrier could maintain energy in ways the F-15, optimized for high-altitude, high-speed performance, could not easily match. The second factor was the Blue Fox radar. Most of the aviation world, including significant elements of the Royal Navy itself, had dismissed the Blue Fox as inadequate. An underpowered set that couldn't look down, couldn't detect low-flying aircraft over rough sea, and paled in comparison to the F-15's APG-63. Ward disagreed, and he disagreed based on operational data rather than specification sheets. He had mastered the Blue Fox in a way that his contemporaries had not, and he had developed tactics that used it effectively in the engagement geometries he was forcing on opponents. The third factor, and the one that Ward himself emphasized most strongly, was tactics. Specifically, the Sea Harrier's ability to force the engagement onto terms that neutralized the F-15's advantages. The F-15 pilots, accustomed to dominating the visual range fight with superior energy and superior numbers, were being consistently outmaneuvered at the merge, placed in geometries where their speed became a liability rather than an asset, where their larger turning radius worked against them, where the Sea Harrier's instantaneous turn performance produced firing solutions that the F-15 could not counter in time. Ward was not accidentally producing these geometries. He had spent years understanding exactly where the Sea Harrier was dangerous and exactly where the F-15 was vulnerable. He had thought harder about this problem for longer, with more operational rigor than almost anyone in the fighter world. And when the test came, at Decimomannu, on record, in front of NATO's finest with Decimomannu's irrefutable tracking systems watching every second, the thinking paid off. 4 months after Decimomannu, April 1982. Argentina invades the Falkland Islands. The task force sails south, and on the deck of HMS Invincible, heading toward a war that the experts said the Sea Harrier could not win, is Commander Sharkey Ward and 801 Naval Air Squadron. The narrative at the time was not encouraging. 20 Sea Harriers against over 200 Argentine military aircraft. Expert commentators, with access to the same performance specifications that had always dismissed the Sea Harrier, predicted that 3 out of 4 British jump jet pilots would not come home. The arithmetic, they said, did not lie. Ward had a different view of the arithmetic. He had spent 3 years proving what the Sea Harrier could do when it was flown correctly, maintained properly, and employed on the right terms. He had trained his pilots relentlessly on the voyage south. Intensive sessions focused on the Blue Fox radar, on night flying, on the tactics that had worked against the Bitburg Eagles. While other parts of the task force debated and deliberated, 801 Squadron prepared. And then, on the first day of combat, 1st of May 1982, the Sea Harriers proved Ward right. Ward's squadron flew their first combat sorties and downed 2 Argentine Mirages and a Canberra. The Sea Harrier, the jump jet that wasn't supposed to be a fighter, was shooting down supersonic jets on day 1. The Argentine pilots noticed. Word spread through their air force with a speed that no intelligence briefing could match. The Sea Harrier wasn't supposed to be dangerous. It was slow. It was subsonic. The Mirage the-3 was faster. The Dagger was faster. Even the A4 Skyhawk in certain configurations could outrun it. But something was wrong with the numbers. Something about the way those small grey jets handled a turning fight. About the AIM-9L Sidewinder missiles they carried. The most advanced close-range air-to-air missile in service anywhere in the world in 1982 was producing results that the Argentine pilots had not been briefed to expect. They gave the Sea Harrier a name. La Muerta Negra, the Black Death. Ward himself flew over 60 combat sorties during the conflict. He was the senior Sea Harrier commander with the task force. Not just a pilot, but the operational mind behind how the jets were employed. The tactics were set. The patrols were flown. He fought 2 battles simultaneously, one against the Argentine Air Force and one against the institutional inertia of his own side, which kept issuing orders he considered tactically wrong and which he, with the confidence of a man who had spent years being proven right against expert opposition, kept disobeying. On the 21st of May 1982, he and his wingman Lieutenant Steve Thomas were flying a low-level combat air patrol west of San Carlos. 2 Argentine Dagger jets appeared at very low altitude, heading for the beachhead. Ward flew directly between them, a move of startling aggression that split their attention and disrupted their attack, before turning to engage. The Daggers broke away from their target and attempted to withdraw. Thomas came up behind them and destroyed both with Sidewinder missiles. A third Dagger, undetected until it opened fire on Ward with its cannon, came in from behind. Ward turned, found it with a Sidewinder, and destroyed it. 3 Argentine jets, 60 seconds, 1 pilot and his wingman. The engagement lasted barely a minute, and as Ward described it later, happened in his mind at spectacular slow motion while the rest of the world moved at normal speed. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. When the Falklands War ended in June 1982, the final tally for the Sea Harrier was one for the history books. 20 Argentine aircraft shot down in air-to-air combat. 0 Sea Harriers lost in dogfights. 2 lost to ground fire. 4 to accidents, including the tragic mid-air collision of 2 801 Squadron aircraft in bad weather that killed 2 of Ward's pilots, a loss he carried for the rest of his life. 20-0 in air-to-air combat. Against an Argentine Air Force that had been buying weapons specifically designed to kill British jets for a decade. Against Mirages and Daggers that were faster. Against pilots who, as the attacks on British shipping proved with devastating effect, displayed enormous skill and genuine courage. The jump jet, that wasn't supposed to be a fighter, had just produced the most one-sided air combat result since the Israeli Air Force destroyed the Syrian Air Force over the Bekaa Valley. In the years that followed, Ward remained the most vocal advocate for the Sea Harrier, for carrier aviation, and for close-range air combat training that any of the services had ever produced. He wrote his memoir, Sea Harrier Over the Falklands, A Maverick at War, first published in 1992, a book that is simultaneously a detailed operational account and an unflinching critique of the institutional failures and missed opportunities of the Falklands air campaign. He argued, publicly and without apology, that better employment of the Sea Harriers could have saved HMS Sheffield, could have prevented the losses at Bluff Cove, could have shortened the war. He named names. He did not soften his assessments. He was not always right. His critics had legitimate points, and the Falklands War, like every war, was too complex to reduce to a single pilot's account of what should have been done differently. The score at Decimomannu, 23-1 against the F-15, carried important caveats. These were close-range engagements, conducted under rules that favored the Sea Harrier's strengths and avoided its weaknesses. Beyond visual range, with the F-15's radar and longer-range missiles in play, the result would almost certainly have been different. Ward acknowledged this. What he refused to accept was the dismissal of within-visual range combat as irrelevant, because in the Falklands, against Argentine jets in the clouds above San Carlos water, visual range was exactly where the fighting happened. He died on the 17th of May, 2024, at his home in Grenada from a suspected heart attack. He was 80 years old. The Royal Navy's head of the Fleet Air Arm described him as having left his mark on the history of naval aviation. The First Sea Lord called him an outstanding fighter pilot and the strongest advocate of carrier-based power. The obituaries in every serious aviation publication on Earth ran long, and somewhere in the aviation world, in the simulators and briefing rooms where fighter pilots still study the geometry of the merge, still argue about the limits of radar range and the value of close-in maneuvering, still debate whether the jump jet really did what the records say it did. The number sits there, unanswered, confirmed by the machines that don't lie. 23 wins, 1 loss. A Royal Navy pilot, a jump jet nobody respected, America's finest fighter, and a score that the aviation world is still trying to fully explain. Warland's Declassified. If this story changed the way you think about the Sea Harrier, subscribe and hit the bell. Drop your take below. Was Sharkey Ward the greatest naval aviator of the Cold War era? And was the Sea Harrier the most underestimated jet in the history of air combat? The numbers suggest both answers are yes.